Today's episode is with Nikita, the founder of Neon. Neon provide open source serverless Postgres. He shares the importance of telling your story.
When I tell the Neon story, people are like, yeah, makes sense, man. Like, go do it. They root for us.
When to start building a sales team.
You see where those people cannot self-serve. And that's where you introduce humans.
A one-on-one on pricing.
And if you can't, then you price the same way as competition with a 20% margin over what they charge. Maybe 30. I mean, in the wild dreams 50, but like unlikely.
And pricing for databases in particular.
In data and analytics, you price for storage and compute, and you try to price storage as cheap as possible because it's S3 pass-through.
Why there used to be two ways to make money in DevTools, and now there is a third.
Again, you can be selling seats, you can be selling storage and compute, or you can be selling tokens. Tokens are the most profitable at this moment.
We talk hiring execs and what he learned by hiring MongoDB's VP of engineering.
Because if you don't hire a good recruiting firm, you're just going to miss out on the top of the funnel, and you'll be punished for that.
Neon is Nikita's second database startup. He previously founded MemSQL, which is now SingleStore and valued at over $1 billion. Nikita's also worked as a VC at Khosla Ventures, as well as in engineering at Meta and Microsoft. He's very smart and strategic about everything he does. And unusually, he's very open about sharing his thought process here. So I think you're going to learn a lot from this episode. When were you like, this is my life. Databases is my life.
It kind of clicked. I remember I was working on my master's project and got really enamored by some of the database data structures. At that time, I was also kind of moonlighting, working for a local internet provider, building websites in PHP and MySQL. And I was doing programming competitions. So like I had my university, my programming competitions, and then my work, right, that paid some bills. And I was pretty productive there. And that was the era of PHP MySQL. And so I wrote a lot of PHP code in my life. All the programming competitions were in C++. And eventually I became a systems engineer. And then the masters, so when you do programming competitions, it's about algorithms and data structures and elegant solutions. And databases, they kind of have all that. So database is computer science in a box where there's a piece of operating system, piece of algorithms and data structures. On this data structures, typically B trees. And then there's a query processor with a bunch of algorithms. There's NP hard problems inside a database where it was an optimizer. And so I didn't quite realize all the spectrum at the time, but that was kind of gravitational pull for me, kind of translating from programming competition. Then I took a pause. So I went to do the grad school, worked on compilers, and then also worked at the same time and worked on like navigation systems, which is, it's just an app. It's an app written in C++ of all the things, but it's an app. And then I joined Microsoft. And in that app, I use SQL Server. And then I got an offer to work for SQL Server. And so that was exciting. Microsoft flew me over, gave me $20,000 budget to relocate, which I don't have a bike, which I never rode once I moved to Redmond. So, but they moved the bike, they moved me, and that was it. And then for 6 years, I worked on the SQL Server engine, where, kind of reliability, performance, algorithms that like I kind of got more indoctrinated there. So that's when I started. And then I worked at SingleStore, right, as CTO first and then CEO. So that's a database from scratch type exercise. Lots of scars. When you build system software, the cycle is so long and the cost of wrong decisions, which you believe in, is high. So because like backtracking is tricky. And there's one thing I learned later at Khosla Ventures is to constantly provide a narrative of what you're doing at the high level. So somebody wakes you up at night and is like, what are you doing, man? And then you're like, well, I'm working on this and that in the grand context of this. And You can explain what the grand context of this is, and being able to defend it and segment it into, well, these are the obvious things, right? If we're building that, we need to do that. And these are the secrets. These are the things that we believe in, the world doesn't. But if I explain it to you why we believe into this, I'll win you over, right? Because logic. And so we didn't have as much of that. We had a lot of rah, let's go build system stuff at SingleStore, and we had an incredible systems team. But that piece is what I learned over there at SingleStore. When I tell the Neon story, people are like, yeah, it makes sense, man. Like, go do it. They root for us. They root for these things to exist.
And that was obviously a big success at SingleStore. But the story of Neon is like, it's the company that you always wanted to build. Like, it's like you wanted someone else to do it, but no one else did it. And then so you were like, I have to go.
I have to go. Yeah. And the other thing is, when you either have passion for technology, or you have passion for your user, or you have both, right? And I think in this particular case, I have passion for both. SingleStore mostly, like SingleStore is a broad platform, but it can do a lot of tricks. Dollars are mostly coming from data and analytics, or real-time analytics. And that's why having this broad platform helps, because some foundation of it allows you to do real-time analytics. But the user of that is some sort of big data person. And while I love them to death, the connection that I have with actual software developers is higher.
Yeah.
Right. The people who are writing code every day, that people who are deploying stuff, the people who are using all this modern DevTools, the people who use, these days they use Cursor and Open and Copilot and all this like crazy AI tools. I have more connection and sympathy to that type of user, and Neon is built for that. And Neon is sophisticated from the systems perspective, so it sits on a pretty hardcore. I think hardcore is the right word, because complex can mean good or bad. So it's not that complex, but it's very hardcore, right? And in places where when reliability and performance, we go down the rabbit hole very, very deeply. And on that hardcore piece of software sits very, very nice developer experience. And that is not something that we were obsessing at SingleStore, and we are obsessing about this at Neon. And the reason we're doing that is that because of the user, because who are we building that for? So yeah, that feels pretty perfect for me personally, the kind of technology and the kind of user and the kind of and what you're obsessing about every day. So that's pretty good. Also, Neon doesn't have a sales team really. So we have a partnership team and like a tiny bit of sales. It's like one salesperson. And it grows on itself double-digit % months and months. And so that's nice, because you can translate that growth to venture dollars, which you translate into product and engineering work, which translates to better growth. And that's also pretty exciting world to live in, where in this world there's a lot more predictability in your business.
Yeah, and you say that the kind of like investment in product leads to growth, but is there something that you kind of have to refine within that in order for it to lead to growth?
So the way I think about it, there's product market fit, and it's not a 0 or 1, it's some number in between. And the higher the product market fit is, the more velocity you can get in your business. And in the PLG company, product-led growth company, whatever that number is, caps you in the amount of revenue, right? So if you only up to, obviously like the scale is relative, but let's just, pull some numbers out of the air. Let's just say like if it's 0.6 or something like this, then you will grow at that rate and you will cap your revenue at some other rate. And the reason you cap the revenue is because that's when your attrition will match your growth. And so as you improve your product, you improve the product market fit, you reduce attrition, you increase retention. And that allows you, because every day you're onboarding, fixed number of users, and then hopefully that number of users keeps growing as you get the word of mouth thing going. And then you either retain them or you don't. And you retain them or you don't based on the quality of your product. And so as you keep improving those things, that's why you have a growth team. That's why you have observability. That's why you obsess about latencies. That's about that whatever you have, you obsess about instant gratification and good experiences. So that improves that motion. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and kind of like dumb or devil's advocate question. If you're working on improving that kind of like that number, getting closer to 1.
1 is Google.
Also, so 1 is Google. Okay, 1 is Google. What's Cursor? Cursor must be pretty high at this point.
Cursor's pretty high. Yeah, Cursor's pretty high.
Saw that. Someone called it the the stripper's pole, not the hockey stick. It's just like straight up on Twitter. So this episode is brought to you by WorkOS. If you're building a dev tool, at some point, your customers are going to start asking you for enterprise features. WorkOS offers you single sign-on, skim provisioning, and audit logs out the box. WorkOS is trusted by Perplexity and Vercel, as well as Workbrew, a homebrew management startup that I recently interviewed. I just told Mike that WorkOS is the sponsor, and this is what Mike said.
Yeah, so WorkOS isn't paying me any money for this. I pay WorkOS money for this, but WorkOS is like one of the best developer tools I've like ever used. It's the documentation and the experience with building with them is so good. Like I initially was almost like, okay, this seems expensive, but then I built an integration with them in about 20 minutes that I had spent 2 days bang my head off the wall trying to build it directly with Okta. And then with WorkOS, I then have like many SSO providers like supported instead of just one. So yeah, like for me, WorkOS is one of the nicest developer experiences I've encountered in the last like 5 years, probably. And it's not surprising because a bunch of the developer team are ex-GitHub and therefore very good at their job.
Go to workos.com to learn more. If you can kind of do that, why, like devil's advocate, why not get like salespeople to also add more,
Yeah,
input?
so this is a good question. And the answer is absolutely we're going to add salespeople, like 100%. And probably we'll do it this year, early next year. But it's not just to get salespeople, it's the machine, right? And the machine is basically like, there's a cohort of users that want to talk to humans. And there's a cohort of users that maybe you just need to educate that Neon exists. So our brand awareness is high in some places, but kind of zilch in some other places. And so we start with awareness, and then you see where those people cannot self-serve. And that's where you introduce humans. So you need the full machine with sales and marketing, with pipeline generation. And then once you have pipeline, then you can have SDRs and like all these things, AEs, yada, 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 all this heavy machinery, very expensive, right? Because all these people, if they're not selling, they're just burning cash, right? Yeah. And then he's like, well, let's add 5 SDRs and like 10 AEs and 5 SEs. And that's like 20 people right there. So multiplied by like, I don't know, 150 to 200K a year, fully loaded cost. That's quite expensive.
Yeah, true. Yeah. So it's about just doing it when you're ready and you feel like they're going to be able to be successful.
Correct. Yeah. Think about this pyramid, and pyramid in the number of users. The width is the number of users, and the height is the sophistication or how close they are to the enterprise. And the very tip of the pyramid, you have Fortune 10. And then from there, you have Fortune 2000. And from there, you have big mid-market. From there, you have SMB. And then there are more people in the SMB that they are in the mid-market that they are in the enterprise, or at least more companies. People, I don't know, dollars wise, the pyramid is almost inverted. There are more money in Fortune 2000 than in the rest of the pyramid. And but you graduate through the pyramid. And in every new segment of this pyramid, the sales motion might be different. So in the Fortune 2000, the sales motion is there's a sales force. But you need to get to that Fortune 2000. And you need to be ready, and you need to be ready from the security and compliance standpoint. And also market fit is different in every segment. And so we go and keep elevating our game and being able to get to the next layer of that pyramid.
Yeah, that makes sense. I really like also how you spoke on another podcast about like the free tier being like the kind of like testing ground, or not, maybe it's the wrong word, but like you kind of proved the technology.
It works on the free tier.
Yeah.
Right. And there is a notion of works at a small scale where it's mostly about the surface area. Right. And then there's works in terms of reliability and performance. That's at the high tier. So free tier gives you an answer for the first question, right? Because if you have thousands of databases spun up every day and developers are using them, they will test, like you have enough traffic going through to test every feature pretty much. But reliability and performance are not being tested really because, well, the workloads, free tier workloads are small. And so you find surprises as you push up. And of course you have internal testing and all those things. At SingleStore, we actually were much better at testing because we shipped on-prem software. We shipped software and we shipped the service. And then a cohort of users, wanted on-prem. I hate on-prem with a passion. Well, the reason to that is like the amount of time I spend on, like at the time it was WebEx and then Zoom calls, and then you give, people give you access to the terminal. So you feel like you're doing brain surgery through a keyhole. And so it's just not fun. Versus in the cloud world, you control the infrastructure. So you can go and optimize the layers all the way. And you manage these things effectively. You have tools rather than trying to adapt to the tools that exist on-prem. Anyway, on-prem talking subs.
Yeah, that's
just
interesting.
does. It just does. But here, because we have a service, we instantly know. So we have a lot of observability everywhere, and we instantly know if something is wrong, it is not working well. Versus at SingleStore, we would test the shit out of it, and we would write blog posts how well we test. So I don't know, like the truth is somewhere in the middle. So I wish we had a little bit more testing here, and I wish we had a much better cloud story at SingleStore.
One of the other things I wanted to kind of relate it is to ask you about pricing, because that was like, you see a lot of like Twitter conversations about like pricing and stuff with databases, and like you've been in the game, a while. So I'm very curious on how you think about pricing.
So in data and analytics, you price for storage and compute, and you try to price storage as cheap as possible because it says free pass-through. Maybe you have a little bit of a margin there. And the reason that is just like, hey, bring data in. It says 3 costs. You need to store it anywhere, might as well store it with us. You get that extra stuff from our platform. And then compute is where the money is at. And then analytics, individual workloads burn a ton of compute. In OLTP and database, operational databases, it's volume. You still want to charge for storage and compute. And a lot of people like Mongo, right? If you go look at Mongo pricing in Atlas, there's like a lot of sizes there. So you choose the size of the instance, and then that's it. And then because Neon is elastic for storage and compute, we can just charge people for storage and compute. Don't quite do this. We used to, and then we would have a free tier, and then there was a paid tier, and we would like start at 0. And then it was confusing people. And so we decided to have a barrier. And so we now like $0, $19, which includes some consumption, some storage and compute, and the rest is consumption. We're actually simplifying that. So
really?
we're going to iterate one more time. And we're going to have a serverless plan that starts at $5. we decided that 0 is not fair for us because, even the Stripe swipe costs you something. So you can't really charge somebody 0. But we have this advantage because we're serverless. And you can have a limited number of databases and still not pay us very much because we're serverless, maybe if you're not using the system. So we decided to compress our $19 and $69 plans, make it $5 plan plus consumption. And when you need, and then you can buy add-ons. Add-ons is like HIPAA or, compliance this, compliance that, security this, security that, private link this, private, stuff like that of that nature. And the sum of all add-ons is roughly adds up to the business plan, which is $700 plus consumption. So that's what we kind of envision to do with pricing. And it's very different between, again, SingleStore and here. SingleStore, like small number of customers, large contracts. Here, lots and lots of customers. We have tens of thousands of customers now, paying customers, and lots of free. And so anything we do with pricing, now there's modeling involved. So there's like a dedicated person who's doing lots of what ifs. It's like, well, I'm giving you the final product. We're almost final, and we might do one more pass. So, the numbers might end up not quite exactly the same that I mentioned, but most likely they will be. But maybe our modeling will discover something and we're like, no, like we actually need to do it slightly differently. But then we kind of know what's going to happen ahead of time. And so that's the world of PLG. That's the world of lots of smaller customers. That's the world of just not really having much one-on-one conversation with your users, but talking to your users via your content and talking to your users via Discord channels and via like shipping certain things and testing.
Because I guess like databases have like a big broad appeal. Every developer needs databases. You can get good numbers, and so.
And every app generated by AI needs a database too.
Yeah, every agent needs one. And how do you you talked a bit about modeling. Like, I just wondered if there's a step before that. Like, how do you, if like other startup founders like thinking about how to price their stuff, like, do you have any kind of like, it always feels like kind of a black box, like very difficult to do as a startup founder. Like, do you have any tips on like how to price things?
Yes, I do. First of all, you either have a completely unique product like ChatGPT that nobody else has, then your pricing is random, $20. So they're like, they literally joke about it, right?
Yeah.
But because ChatGPT is perfect market fit, like that pricing turned out to be accepted by the market, then all the competition is $20. Perplexity is $20, ChatGPT is $20, like everything's $20. If you have competition, you need to study their pricing. If your technology is doing the same as the competition, but somewhat in a different way, serverless versus, fixed size, there's some innovation, then you can anchor your pricing against this innovation to highlight your advantage. You can either do it or you can't. And if you can't, then you price the same way as competition with a 20% margin over what they charge. Maybe 50, maybe 30. I mean, in the wild dreams, 50, but like, unlikely.
And that's if you're doing something significantly better than them.
So you need to do something significantly better. Significantly better. And then pricing applies to a market segment. So your competition in the same market segment, what is their pricing? And then you need to find yourself, if you're within 20%, end user doesn't care. They care about value. If you're twice as expensive, they kind of care. You may still get away with this, but they kind of care. But if you start looking at tech products and their pricing, you will find that they're remarkably tight vis-a-vis the competition swim lane, right? And then my ChatGPT versus Anthropic versus Perplexity example shows us this is what it is in the consumer market.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's like, I think the first one you said is like you have an inherent cost advantage where you can be cheaper than the competition and put that forward, and like you're like the low cost player, or you differentiate yourself by being better quality and you charge like
Right.
30-40% more, or you kind of fall in.
Right. Yeah. The margin profile, if you're a successful business, your margin profile should be 60 plus. So then, AWS exists for everyone. Your architectural advantage, and that over a period of time, in the fullness of time, everybody builds everything, right? Unless they die. Because, it's kind of like if somebody comes up with a good idea and the market responds to this good idea, like then it's going to be copied 100%. And then certain things is just hard to copy. For us, it's storage. It's hard to copy our storage. But people are working on this in large clouds, in competition. Supabase working on this thing called OrealDB, which has some promise. Microsoft is working on something. Google introduced LODB. Like separation of storage and compute is a good idea. You just can't put it out there in like 2 days or something like this. No cursor will help you to build storage from scratch.
This is it's not on Stack Overflow.
Right.
Yeah, one thing I noticed actually is you're very complimentary about like your competition, and like you're unusually very like it seems like you're very like you study your competition, but you're also very like, I've not heard you say a single bad thing about any of your competitors. It's quite a nice way that you do things.
I'm very competitive. I'm very, very competitive. I think when you bash competition, but you're not genuine, you come off really bad, especially in the world of DevTools where the proof is like 30 seconds away. So if you say they suck for whichever reason, and then a developer is like, I'm going to check it, and they go there and they don't suck, now you lose credibility with the developer. And so I try not to do that. And when people ask me, like, what do you think of database company XYZ? Well, I tell what I think. Investors ask for all the time, for example. I tell what I think, and I try to give credit where credit is due. And then I'm also careful when I say bad things. And when I say things like, well, I see this as a deficiency there, which may or may not cost them things, right? Because they probably recognize that too. But since I've been in the space, I kind of recognize that might be an issue. But that's for you to figure out. Like, this is not my job to go and dig and basically match my observation with what's happening in the field and in reality, and go deal by deal or something like this. It's like I want to learn from what works mostly, and I want to learn work from a job well done. So some companies do a very good job in our space. Snowflake is doing a great job in analytics. Mongo is doing a great job in operational workloads. Supabase is doing a great job in the developer ecosystem. I want to learn from all of this. And there's 2 or 3 ways to learn from it. One of the best ways is hiring. So if you hire people, especially great people from those companies, our VP of engineering is from Mongo, for example. So we have some people from Snowflake as well. We have some people from CockroachDB. And they're very good at systems. And CockroachDB built a very good system. Like, I don't think it won the developer. Like, that's the flaw. But if in terms of the strength of the engine itself, I think they have a very solid engine. And so if you bring people from that culture, you add to your toolbox inside your own company. And of course, you hire people from outside the database industry too, because they also come with ideas and tricks.
Yeah. What specifically? So like digging into like the your VP of engineering coming over from Mongo, like what kind of things, like if some other DevTools founders like thinking of like hiring someone from like the really big player in their field, what kind of things would you say like that you get out of it and like as a startup?
Well, I can say a few things. So first of all, you as a founder need to look in the mirror and clearly recognize your own strengths and weaknesses and where you need complementary things, what things will trigger you. So to me, it's work ethics. So like the lack of work ethics is just like triggers me. I cannot survive that. And of course, like losing trust with someone would just like it's over. So you need to think about, first of all, compatibility with the founder. Then you look at what the organization needs. The organization at the various time of their journey can struggle with a myriad of things. Last year, around the same time when we brought James, our VP of engineering, we struggled with reliability. And reliability is one of those things that, like I can tell you the reliability is awesome now, and tomorrow we'll have something, and so like I will look like an idiot. But what I can say is that in the period of time between, February last year, February this year, if you look at the incidents, the time at which incidents were on, and the severity of them, and kind of map them into some sort of number function and plot them, it's like a steep drop.
Really?
Right. So objectively, based on the metrics that we're observing, reliability is much, much higher. And one of the requirements for the VP of engineering was to know how to fix that. We were actually already figuring that out. So we were already on the right trend. But in addition to that, James brought in processes, people, attention, team management, and like, because reliability is not one thing. It's not one bug. It's it's like hairy, sophisticated thing where you can improve, and eventually you get the reward of being a very, very stable system. And then, so compatibility with you, like this, with the kind of style of leader you want superpowers for the leader. I think one of the superpowers for James is very empathic, and people want to work with him and for him, and it's kind of a big deal, right? But there are many ways to drive the organization forward. And, one way is this is the hill, we're going to take the hill, we're going to lose some people on the roads to the hill. And those people who we're going to lose, that's their fault. But we're going to take that hill and, we're just marching there. And then there's a way to run the organization where you understand the people and you working towards the hill together in a smart way. And you don't want to lose people on the way to that hill. Like that's unacceptable. Underperform is a different story, right? They're not everybody can be at a startup. That is, of course, every startup must part ways with people who are not kind of like pulling weight in the same way as the top performers. Otherwise, the classic, A players, B players, C players comes in. But you certainly don't want to be an asshole about it, and you don't want to burn the organization and throw people under, machine guns, because like there's no victory there. And so that kind of leadership, I think, works better with me. It's kind of nerdy, right? So thinking about the organization as an engineering systems, recognizing that it's driven by people, and giving them credits, making sure that you listen to the people, hear their concerns, explain them what you're doing, like taking that time, and in return, the organization has higher morale, and at the end of the day, moving faster. Yeah, that was the thing for us, for James. I can give you some other examples where those are not the most important things. So let's just say you're doing a turnaround, right? So the business is not working, it needs to be a different business. Or the engineering team is not working, and it needs to be a new engineering team. And the new engineering team, either because the overall bar is low, or because the composition of the team must be different based on the change in the technology landscape, right? We had on-prem people, now we have cloud people. We had website people, now we have mobile people. And, once the market, so you either adapt to the market or you don't, right? And sometimes the market changes so fast, you need to change the team. Different kind of leader needs to be here in this type of situation. Or it could be, we're doing some deep research. And therefore, you need to bring a leader that will bring other researchers. So now that becomes the higher a bit. So I think it's very situational. What I can recommend is to always start with what is the situation. Tell yourself, like the narrative thing, like explain it to yourself. What are you doing? Then explain it to your board. Then explain it to your friend. Then explain it to your board. Explain it to other execs. And then act, and then try to hire the best recruiting firm you can possibly have. I'll do a plug here. I like working with Alex Zakopowski. He used to be at Artisanal. Now he started his own firm, Fusion Talent. I think that's what it's called.
How do you spell his last name? Sorry, Alex
Zakopowski.
Okay, so
will you hear?
Yeah, someone just have a go in Google. You'll find him, I'm sure.
Fusion Talent.
Yeah.
It's a Polish last name. He's American from the Midwest, I think.
Amazing. So, and he's really good at finding the best.
I just meant Polish and Midwest. Actually, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Alex is great, and we work together. That's another thing. Well together. That's another thing. But it doesn't have to be Alex, but it has to be a good recruiting firm. Because if you don't hire a good recruiting firm, you're just going to miss out on the top of the funnel, and you'll be punished for that.
Like devil's advocate, why not just like go try and reach out to like the VP of engineering at like every big public database company? Or
I think you can. I think you're still going to miss a lot of talent. And the reason is that for VPs, changing jobs is an expensive and risky proposition, right? There's opportunity cost there, and you're doing diligence on them, and they're doing diligence on you. And actually having an intermediary helps them, helps them to make the process a little bit more formal. Now, it is expensive. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not. And you're either cash constrained or you're not cash constrained. So it's, it's a little bit of an art, right? The other thing, and sometimes VC tell you that it's like, we're going to help you with recruiting. Not really. They will all tell you that. And they will have recruiting teams. And then recruiting teams will do work for you. It's just not going to be as high quality work, most likely, that you can do otherwise. And also, a lot of times, those recruiting teams in VCs are marketing. So you can close early stage companies. You're saying, "Oh, I have a recruiting team. I'll help." Really, I think about entrepreneurship as you kind of on your own. Like you expect lots of people to help you. Around you, and you should be tapping into everybody to get that help. But you also need to see through things a little bit. And hiring executives is super duper important. And therefore, I would go for not the cheapest, but for the highest output value type approach. And I tried multiple ways. In a SingleStore, when we were so green, we tried cheaper recruiting firms. We tried, or rather than proven recruiting firms, we tried hiring through VCs. We tried reaching out on LinkedIn. We tried it all, right? And the stuff that reliably worked was search firms.
Yeah.
With the support of everybody involved. So you go to the board, I'm hiring this search firm. Here's the man, add that first this specific person in the search firm, man or woman. The board, some of the people on the board wants to raise their hands like, I don't know him. I would just want to, just for reliability, let me talk to this person. The board signs off. You hire this person. Then it's intense few weeks to few months of searching for the specific executive, understanding of what the process is, but everything is kind of formalized. And also like those people, if you do it the first time, those people will help you to interview as well, right? You're not going to just chat, right? You can have a plan. And they will help you devise that plan. So I think all of that is like making those things a little bit more formal actually helps.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, I hadn't had anyone speak about that before. It seems like, is it pretty common? Like the most like similar sized companies to Neon would be using exec recruiters.
Some do, some don't. Pretty common.
Okay. Yeah.
And seeing the talents coming through, not just the people that you hire, but the people that you see in the pipeline. You're like, yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I think you mentioned this on another show where you were talking about like how you actually like learn a lot about like how different people are doing things. I think the topic was on mentorship, and you were talking about like going through that process can actually be like a really great way to get lots of different perspectives on things.
Yeah.
Very cool. Nikita, I realize that we're coming towards the end. So I want to ask you a couple of last questions. So the first one is, if you had like one piece of advice for a DevTools founder that you were just do this one thing if you don't do anything else.
I'm going to steal something from Guillermo at Vercel, like keep developing your taste. I think taste is very important. And he on the recent podcast said that code is becoming kind of cheaper and cheaper to produce with AI tools, but taste is you can't just ChatGPT taste. Maybe that will come too. I don't know. I know that was a very good answer. I have an observation. I don't know if it's I'm like squinting at the world and what's working, what's not in the modern world. And we talked about how Cursor, ramped the revenue very, very quickly. I think you can, in DevTools, you can sell a dev tool, and a dev tool would be like, Visual Studio Code or something like this, or GitHub. And then you benefit if like the whole planet is using that. You can also sell storage and compute. So you're in the DevOps budget. So you're now selling databases, you're selling compute, you're selling Kubernetes, you're selling Kafka, you're selling MongoDB. Or recently you can sell tokens. And if you sell tokens, you sell in inference or you sell in Cursor, right? Because you're running those tokens. You're selling, Perplexity, you're selling tokens. ChatGPT, you're selling tokens. V0, you're selling tokens, right? And I think tokens scale a lot faster than the other two. So I was of an opinion that unless you're like GitHub and you like Scorcher, Swan, everything, it's actually really hard to make money in DevTools. It's really freaking hard because developers will like to pay for tools. They like to use open source tools. So there's constant commoditization. So So what you end up monetizing is either seats, but then there's always a next open source tool that like free for you, and developers build other things for developers. Then you monetize in a service, but that service usually hosts something. And therefore, it's a proxy on storage and like it's either seats to storage and compute, right? On the markup, added value on top of storage and compute. And then the big business could be built, right? Snowflake's $3 billion in run rate, so on storage and compute. And then tokens are like next level. So my advice is like understand that framework to whatever you're building and apply it, and like, just like whatever you choose, be aware of what's going on.
So it's kind of like don't sell your code in a way, like sell the compute or the storage, rather not just like you wrote this great code that people can use in a sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, what are you going to be selling eventually, right? Again, you can be selling seats, you can be selling storage and compute, or you can be selling tokens.
Yeah,
tokens are the most profitable at this moment. At this moment.
What I'm hearing is sell tokens.
Sell tokens. Otherwise, otherwise it's a longer journey, right? We're selling storage and compute. It's a longer journey. There's a lot of storage and compute that needed to be consumed, and those companies that sell tokens help you consume it too, right? So like yesterday, like I said, we started this conversation with 17,000 databases, so one database every 5 seconds. So that's cool. But yeah, maybe you can figure out how to sell tokens.
That's awesome. And Nikita, do you have anything that you want to send people to?
Use Postgres, folks. Use Postgres. I know you already do that. Then try Neon and you'll like it.
Amazing. Well, Nikita, thank you so much for joining. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you, Jack. Really appreciate it.